morning, everyone. I'm Katie Steger. I'm NYSCA's Director of Capital Projects. Thank you all for joining us for our live FY 2025 Capital Funding Opportunity webinar. I am joined today by our Capital Projects Program Officer, Lindsay Turley, and we are thrilled to be joined today also by hundreds of attendees from all 10 regions of our state. So thanks so much for being here. I want to begin by expressing our deep appreciation to the governor and New York State Legislature for their investment of $80 million in capital funding for projects across the state this year. Capital projects play a transformative role in the longevity of arts and cultural facilities, and in turn, these projects strengthen our communities, promote accessibility and sustainability, and contribute to the growth of our economy. Today's webinar will be an overview of our FY 2025 capital project opportunities. We will review eligibility, the application timeline, pre-qualification, and some frequently asked questions. Please know that we may go over time a little bit, past about 12:15, just to accommodate some of those questions, of which there are many. And thank you to those of you who submitted questions in advance. We will do our best to get to as many of them as we can in a dedicated Q&A session following the main presentation. You can still submit questions through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, but we do really encourage you to listen to the whole presentation before you submit new questions, as we hope that many of them will be answered in today's slides. This is a reminder that our guidelines are live on the NYSCA website right now, and the portal is open, so you can start your application at any time. A recording of today's webinar and a PDF of the presentation deck will also be posted to the NYSCA website within the next couple of days. Please know we will also be hosting virtual office hours with Lindsay and myself. We are the Capital team, so if you have questions, you can come to one of those sessions. They start this Thursday at noon, and they will be continuing at least once a week, sometimes multiple times a week through January 2025. Registration links will be posted to the NYSCA website following today's webinar. So you can go to the webinar section. There's a little drop down at the top of the website and sign up. There is a limited registration for each session, 35 people per session. So please go ahead and sign up early if you think you're going to want to attend. And please let us know if you're not going to be available to attend so that someone else can take your slot. Just some other key information here. The application portal closes on January 14, 2025 at 4 p.m. This is the most important date. You need to get this in your calendar. There are absolutely no extensions or exceptions to that date. If it is 4:01 p.m., we cannot accept the application. So please get going as early as you can. And make sure that you set your calendars even a day early. Tell everybody they have to get their stuff to you so that you can submit it in plenty of time. Don't wait until the last moment. It's a real heartbreaker, and we don't want to have to turn anybody away. So please, 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 January 14, 2025, 4 p.m. at the absolute latest. So let's talk about the very first step to applying for NYSCA funding. Any kind of NYSCA funding, not just capital funding, is pre-qualification. You must be pre-qualified in the state financial system to do business with New York State agencies. This is not just a NYSCA requirement. This is a requirement for all state grants. If you have been pre-qualified in the past and did so on the Grants Gateway portal, please be advised that this process has moved to the New York Statewide Financial System. We call it SFS. You may hear us refer to it throughout the presentation. This is a separate portal from Smart Simple, which is the application portal. So you'll be working in two different portals. First is SFS. So if you've not done this before, I strongly encourage you to start this process right now. You must be pre-qualified in pre-qualified status in the SFS system at the time of the application deadline in order for us to review your application. Anybody who's not pre-qualified at the time of the deadline will be deemed ineligible and your application will not be reviewed. So please start this process now. There are pre-qualification instructions in the application manual, which is sort of housed within the guidelines. It's also in the 10 tips for pre-qualification webinar that we have on our website. It's a two-step process for new applicants. So if you've never done this before, the first thing you need to do is register in SFS, and then you need to submit your pre-qualification application. If you are a returning applicant, that means that you've probably done pre-qualification before. You'll need to log in to the SFS vendor portal to check on your pre-qualification status and your expiration dates for pre-qualification. It does expire annually. So just because you've done it before does not mean you're still pre-qualified now. So please log in, check your expiration date. If you're going to expire before January 14th, you need to make sure that you replace any documents, update any documents that need to be updated, and resubmit for pre-qualification. If you have questions, you can email our pre-qualification team. The email address is on the slide. You can also contact the SFS help desk if you have SFS specific questions, technical questions about logging in, passwords, uploading documents, etc. There's an email or a phone number on the slide as well for that. Okay, what can I apply for? Let's dig into the actual opportunities that we have. So we have 3 opportunities available for capital funding this year. This includes our small and mid-sized capital improvement grants, our large capital improvement grants, which have an economic development component, and then new this year, we have design grants for capital projects, and funding supports projects that are in publicly accessible spaces that are used for arts and cultural programming. So, not back offices where the public can't go, and not non-arts organizations, not things that are used for other purposes, has to be for arts and cultural programming. These can include capital improvements like new construction, renovations, expansions. It can also include the purchase and installation of capitally eligible systems or major capital equipment. And the design opportunity can include the development of mid-stage or advanced design documents. This is not for conceptual design. We will talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So here's just an at-a-glance comparison of the differences between the opportunities. Small and mid-sized grants range from $10,000 to $2 million. We have no match and matching grants in this opportunity. No match grants are available for organizations with budgets under $2 million. And, for a no match grant, you don't have, you can fund the entire project with your grant. You don't have to bring in additional funds from somewhere else. If you are applying for a matching grant, the minimum total project cost is $100,000. And the grant term is 3 years. All projects have a 3-year grant term, although you can finish it sooner with an optional 2-year extension. And for this program, funding supports construction, capital systems, and soft costs that are associated with those projects, which can include some late stage design. Our large grants have grant sizes from $2 million to $10 million. The total project minimum for this is $4 million. So if you're applying for a $2 million grant, you need to have a minimum of a total project cost of $4 million. We can't fund more than 50% of the total project cost here. All of these are matching grants. There is no match opportunity in the large grants. This opportunity, as I mentioned, has a community and economic development focus. There are additional questions about this in the application itself. There is also a review that's conducted by ESD that I'll go into a little bit later. And we encourage everybody that wants to apply for this program, particularly because of that extra economic development component. We'd like everybody to contact us ahead of time just to make sure that the project is really appropriate for this program and well aligned with that before you go through the process and find, actually, I didn't get a very high score on my economic development criteria because this is not a well-aligned project. So just check in with us before you apply. These also have a grant term of 3 years and similarly funds construction, capital systems, and soft costs. Okay, so now our newest program, design grants. These grants range from $50,000 to $500,000. These do have a no match option, and I will go into the details on that shortly. Total project minimum is $50,000. That's for no match grants. If it's a matching grant, the total project minimum is $100,000. And the grant term is 2 years for design grants with an optional 1-year extension. For this category, funding supports mid and advanced stage design. So that's schematic design, design development, and construction documents. It does not support conceptual design. You're expected to be at that stage already or having completed that stage already. It also does not fund the construction portion of the project, but it does need to point to a capital project, and we will talk about that in great detail further into this presentation. Okay, so let's dive into the individual opportunities here. Small and mid-sized capital grants. We anticipate the awards will be announced sometime in April. It can occasionally be a little bit later. The grant term will run from July 1st through June 30th. All of these opportunities have a grant start date on July 1st. And for all of these opportunities, what that means is the project can start before then, but no NYSCA funds can be incurred prior to the grant period start date. So if you are applying with a project that has already begun or that you expect to start before July 1st, please be very clear in your application that none of the activities you want NYSCA to support will take place prior to July 1, so that the panel understands that all of the expenses that you are proposing for NYSCA will in fact be eligible from a timing perspective. You can use this funding for capitally eligible systems, capital construction, or a combination of equipment and construction, and you will be asked to identify which of those categories you'd like to be reviewed in. And we do give priority to small and mid-sized organizations in this program. And that is organizations with average annual expenses of $5 million or less. And that's based on your IRS Form 990. As I mentioned, this program has matching grants and a no match option. For the no match option, you need to have an operating budget of $2 million or less in order to apply for that option. I just want to highlight here, you are eligible if you have an operating budget of $2 million or less, you're eligible for no match grants. That doesn't mean you can only apply for no match grants. Organizations of any size can apply for the larger matching grants as well. Sometimes we have some folks who are concerned that they can only apply for smaller grants if they're smaller organizations. That's not true. You absolutely can apply for anything. However, the no match opportunity is restricted just to small organizations. So in that case, if this is of interest to you, you can apply for a no match grant in the range of $10,000 to $25,000 or the range of $50,000 to $99,000. And you can identify a specific grant amount within those ranges. This is new this year, so if you've applied before, this is a change. These used to be flat grants and they used to cap out at $50,000. Now you can, you could opt for $15,000, you could opt for $17,000, as long as it's within one of those two ranges. That's absolutely fine. If you put in a request amount that is between $25,000 and $50,000, which is not one of those set ranges, it will be reduced down to the $25,000 level. So please keep that in mind. Please do not make a request in the range that's not supported here, because then we'll have to consider your application for a different amount than what you actually applied for. And also, I just want to point out that the project cost for a no match grant, your total project cost, must be greater than or equal to the amount you're requesting. If you're requesting a grant of $20,000, you can't have a total project cost of $15,000 because you'll have a $5,000 gap that doesn't have any expenses associated with it. You have to document where all the expenses are going to go. For matching grants, no more than 50% of the total project cost can be supported by state funds, and that's inclusive of the request from NYSCA and any other state funds that you may already have or be applying for. So what that means is if your total project cost is $2 million, the total amount of support you get from New York State can be $1 million. So if you have a grant from ESD already for $500,000, you could apply to NYSCA for another $500,000 to make up your $1 million, 50% of your total project cost. The amounts for this range from $50,000 to $2 million, and organizations of any size can apply for the matching grants in small and mid-size. Our large capital grants, there's a lot of similarity between the large cap and the small and mid-size, but I'm going to highlight a few of the differences. First, the grants are larger. 2 million to 10 million is the range for requests in this program. There is no matching category for large cap. So In that case, the minimum total project cost, if you're going to apply to large cap, is $4 million. And these all include that matching requirement of 50% max. So NYSCA funds and any other state funds can only make up a maximum of 50% of your total project cost. The other half has to come from other sources. Those other sources can include city funding, they can include federal funding, they can include foundations, individuals, it can come from your annual fund. Any of those are acceptable for matching, but they can't be from other state sources. The other key difference here that I mentioned before is that the large capital grants include an economic development priority. So what this means in practice is your application will be reviewed by ESD, who will conduct a benefit cost analysis on the project based on information that you provide. And they will give us a benefit cost ratio, which is to say, what is the overall benefit to the state compared to the overall cost to the state. That ratio will be converted into a score on the 0 to 5 scale that NYSCA uses. We will talk about that later in the presentation. And that economic development score will make up 25% of your overall score. So it's a pretty large portion of your overall score. So if your project is not going to increase tourism or increase restaurant and retail traffic in your local area, or hotel stays, or create full-time jobs, or be part of a downtown revitalization effort, those are the key indicators that ESD is looking for. If it's not doing anything like that, for example, an HVAC project is probably not going to be a good fit for the large capital program, which just means that in the end, your economic development score would be lower and bring down your overall score. So this is why we ask you to reach out to us. We'll help talk you through whether or not you want to apply to this program or reduce your request amount and apply to the small and mid-size. So the last category here is capital design. This is our new program. Similar award announcement. We expect to announce all of these hopefully in April. Our grant term is still starting on July 1st for design, but these are 2-year grants rather than 3, and extensions of 1 year will be considered. You still cannot spend any NYSCA funds prior to July 1, but let me just say a few things about the design, the way that the design grant is structured. This category supports only mid and advanced stage design. Again, that's schematic design, design development, and construction drawings. If your project is the kind of project that would necessitate a conceptual design, like a set of conceptual design documents, you're expected to already have those in hand at the time that you apply. The cost of those conceptual design documents can be included in the total project cost that you are proposing in your budget. You just can't use any NYSCA funds that you are requesting towards that conceptual design. So that can be part of your match, your other 50%. And those expenses we expect would have been incurred prior to July 1st, but you can't use any NYSCA funds for them. This project, when you consider your total project cost for design, we are also asking that you keep it exclusive to the design portion of the project, even though we're going to ask you to talk about the larger capital project that you are planning extensively in the application. So for the purposes of this grant, your total project cost is the design portion of the project only, not the construction portion. You are expected, and we're going to talk about what this all means in a few moments, you are expected to be planning and designing something that constitutes a capitally eligible project. It has to be actual capital. It can't be maintenance. It can't be landscaping. It has to be something that actually qualifies as capital. So I will get more into detail on that in a moment. The other limitation on this program is it is limited to organizations that have an annual operating budget of $10 million or less. So if your organization is larger than that, based on your annual operating expenses, you're not going to be eligible to apply here. If you want to apply for no match grant, as in the small and mid-sized category, you'll have to have an operating budget of $2 million or less. But that's just for no match grants. Those small organizations, again, can apply for a larger matching grant if they want to. Okay, So that's it on design. Oh, there's the matching. There's all the matching information. It works exactly the same way as the other grants. The no match grants for design are 50,000 to 99,000. We don't have the 10,000 to 25 in this category. So it has to be in this $50,000 to $99,000 range. And again, that's just for the smaller organizations with budgets of 2 million or less. The matching grants are 50,000 to 500,000. And for the matching grants, just the same as the other programs, no more than 50% of the design costs can be supported by state funds, including your NYSCA support. Okay. So let's talk about eligibility. These are the requirements in order to be eligible for funding through these programs. You must be pre-qualified, as I mentioned before, and that pre-qualification status has to be in place on January 14th, 2025 at the time of the application deadline. So if you're going to fall out of pre-qualification on January 1st, please make sure that you are updating your pre-qualification in the SFS portal. You must be a nonprofit arts and cultural organization. That means that you must be a 501c3 nonprofit organization and that your primary mission must be arts and cultural activities. We sometimes have applications from organizations that are arts and culture organizations that are embedded in larger nonprofits that are not arts and culture specific. So you could imagine, say, a museum that lives on the campus of a university. That's a pretty common one, and they operate completely autonomously, but they don't have their own 501c3. These are what we call embedded organizations, and if this is describing your organization and you have your own board of advisors and you do your own fundraising, have your own budget, pay your own staff, you are eligible to submit a form to us. You can email us, we'll provide the form to you, and let us know if you meet those, you'll answer some questions, let us know if you meet those criteria. We will review it and let you know if you are eligible to apply. Non-arts organizations that simply have some programs for arts and culture are not eligible to apply. And we know that there are many of those and they do wonderful programming throughout the state. That is not what this program is for. So unfortunately, those groups are not eligible. But if you have questions about this and whether your organization qualifies, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll have all of our contact information at the end of the presentation. Site control is the next eligibility issue to discuss. You must be able to provide documentation, evidence that you have control of the property and will continue to have control of the property for at least as long as the useful life of the improvement that you are proposing. So that means either you're providing a deed that proves that you own the property, or a copy of a long-term lease agreement that has a remaining term on it at the time of the application. That's at least as long as the useful life. I'll talk about what the useful life actually is in a moment, but if the useful life of your project is 15 years, you need to provide us with a lease that shows you have at least 15 years remaining on it. We will accept leases that have automatic renewal clauses. This is often the case with a municipality, for example. So perhaps you have 10 years remaining on your lease and then you have 3 consecutive 5-year renewal terms. That's absolutely fine as long as the option to renew is at the discretion of the tenant. If there is discretion for the landlord to just cancel the lease, it doesn't qualify. So you have to demonstrate that it essentially is up to you, the nonprofit organization that is leasing, whether or not you continue your lease. The exception to this requirement is there are $10,000 and $25,000 no match grants in the mid-size category that are for equipment only. And they have to be for equipment that could be installed in one facility, but then could be uninstalled and moved to a different facility if the organization had to move. Those applicants can apply with a minimum 2-year lease at the time of the 2 years remaining at the time of the application deadline. That's the only exception to that, and a very brief rationale for why is just the way that capital projects are funded is debt financing, and in order to finance it, we need to ensure that the property is maintained and the improvement is maintained for at least as long as that useful life of that improvement. It's also to ensure that the facility remains open to the public and used for arts and cultural purposes for more than just a year or two. So that is the site control requirement. If you have a different kind of agreement that's not a lease or a deed, please contact us and send it to us for review. We will take a look at it before you go through the process of applying to make sure that it qualifies. And if you are conducting exterior improvements as part of your project and you don't own the facility, you must provide evidence of approval for those improvements from your landlord. So just a letter that's signed by the landlord, or something to that effect, an agreement that says it's okay for you to perform those improvements. Next slide. We also have some priority areas in terms of they're not eligibility, but they are priorities. So there's a set of priorities that are listed in the guidelines. I'll throw them up on the screen shortly. Projects must align with one or more of those priorities in order to be well qualified for support here. We also prioritize projects that are in areas that have been historically underserved by arts and cultural organizations. And so that means they have lower concentrations of arts organizations or cultural offerings in general. We also give priority to new grantees, those that haven't received funding, especially significant funding through this program in the past. And I will note that prior capital recipients are eligible to apply, but that the combined total of their FY22, 23, and 24 awards can't exceed the program maximum. So if you're applying in midsize and you've gotten $2 million in the last 3 years, then you've exceeded the maximum amount for that program. You wouldn't be eligible to apply there this year. In large cap, the maximum for that program is $10 million. So the same apply. Okay, so I've thrown around the word capital and capital eligibility. Let's talk about what that actually means. In order for something to qualify as a capital improvement, it must be a permanent alteration or installation to a piece of property, and it must increase the value of that property and or extend the IRS estimated useful life of that property. So this is typically the construction of a new facility or the renovation or refurbishment of an existing building or one of its components. That resets the useful life on that building or component. It can also include the purchase and installation of a major piece of capital equipment or a complete capitally eligible system. And the development of design documents will qualify as long as it's for a project that qualifies as capital. So what you're planning has to meet this set of criteria here in order for it to qualify. So if you're going to provide to us a set of architectural drawings at the end of your design project that points to the construction of a new wing on your museum, that would definitely qualify as a capital project. Next slide, just to dig in a little bit on some of the terms that I just used in terms of major capital equipment or capitally eligible systems. A major piece of capital equipment needs to be, related to the mission of the organization and needs to be, a piece of professional grade equipment that's going to be permanently installed or at least so substantial that it's difficult to move out of that facility. So you could imagine here a professional projector or a bookbinding machine or some kind of, high-tech printer. Typically, these are pieces of equipment that cost above $25,000. So we have set that in the guidelines, you will see, as a kind of threshold. If you have a piece of equipment that you think qualifies but comes in under $25,000, please reach out to us to discuss, and we will help you determine whether it is a capitally eligible piece of equipment. For something to qualify as a capitally eligible system, it must be a complete system. So you have to be buying the whole thing, not just one or two of its components. And it all has to be new. It can't be an upgrade or used or, a few pieces of new equipment that get inserted into an older system. And it has to be permanently installed and installed by a professional contractor if you well, let me make a comment about that last bullet. If you're going to include installation in your budget as a cost that you would like the grant to cover, you cannot include staff time for your salaried staff to install the system. It would have to be installed by a professional contractor that's on a separate contract. If you're not going to include the installation as part of your budget, it is fine for, in most cases, as long as it doesn't require any special licensing that they don't have, it's fine for your staff to install things like lighting systems. But you need to make sure that however it's being installed, it is being installed by someone with the appropriate certification or licensing. So that's how we define a capitally eligible system. If you're not meeting those thresholds, and they are outlined in great detail in the guidelines, the application may have to be rejected on the basis of it not being capitally eligible. So an example of that, if you're applying for a lighting system, but you don't include any kind of control element like a lighting board, then that, or you're just applying for new instruments, then that would not be a complete system and it wouldn't be eligible for support. The other term that I threw around a lot in the last couple of slides is the IRS useful life estimate. This is the anticipated life of the improvement or piece of equipment or equipment system. And it varies from project to project, but typically it must be at least 10 years in order for it to qualify. And that is the minimum threshold for this program. So a lighting system is typically 10 years, HVAC system 15, a roof 20 years, an elevator 20 years, stone facade could be 50 years. It really depends on what the work is that you're doing. So you will need to consult with your consultants to tell you what the appropriate term is for the useful life estimate. It is not how long you think you're going to use it for, or how long you think it's going to last, or how long your last one lasted. We know very often these things get used past their useful life. But this is more how, how long the IRS says it's going to last, and that, you could think about it a little bit the way you think about how long it takes something to depreciate. Not exactly the same, but it works in a similar way. Just to clarify that the reason that this is important, that you're able to identify the useful life, is that this will link to your site control documentation and how long you've provided evidence that you have site control for. So this is the point where if you say you're going to replace your roof, that's a 20-year useful life. You need to demonstrate that you're going to have control of the property where you're replacing the roof for at least 20 years. Okay, next. So we've talked about what is capital. Let's talk about what's not capital, but is commonly confused for capital. Maintenance, repairs, and individual pieces of equipment are not capital. They are operating costs. So, you could think about it as anything that would need to be fixed or replaced or have maintenance conducted on it more than once through the duration of the useful life is probably not capital. If there is a hole in your roof and you're going to patch it, or you have a leak in your chimney and you need to repoint part of the brick, those are repairs, and they don't reset the useful life of the asset, and so they don't qualify as capital. Anything that has a useful life of under 10 years will not qualify as capital here. And if it's not increasing the value or extending the useful life of the property. The other thing that is commonly asked, programming, staff expenses, those are operating expenses and cannot be paid for with capital dollars, even if they are for staff that are working on the capital project. So if you have somebody on your staff who's responsible for management, we understand that they need to be paid. They can't be paid for with this grant. So some questions to ask yourself about whether you are ready to apply for this program. We are looking for projects that are close to shovel ready and ideally ready to commence construction within 12 months after being selected for funding. You need to be able to sort of bullets 2, 3, and 4 here really kind of go together. They talk to each other. You need to be able to provide us detailed pricing estimates from contractors. And to do that, you're going to need to be in advanced drawing stages and have a detailed scope of work. So What we typically find is sometimes folks will apply when they are still in the sort of schematic phase or even in the conceptual phase. And you are required to get 2 estimates from contractors on the project or from third-party estimator. But often, if they are not far along in their design, the contractors are not able to give detailed estimates. And so what we have are estimates that are very likely to change drastically during the course of the project, which means that the budget that you provide is not concrete, which means that the fundraising plan that you provide is not going to be adequate to, to let us know if you're going to be able to cover the costs if they escalate considerably. So all of these elements talk to each other, and this is what the panel is considering. So we are looking for projects that are further along in order to get all of that detail so that we can feel confident in your budgeting and your fundraising plans and your cash management through the project. If you have a project that does not require architectural drawings, and that is not something we can answer for you, you need to, talk to your consultants and your contractors about whether it does or not. This could include like a roof replacement or something like that, where very often there isn't an architectural drawing needed. We still are expecting you to have very detailed specifications, a detailed scope of work, information that provides us a lot of detail on the pitch of the roof and the dimensions and the materials, and all of that needs to be included here. When we say advanced drawings, that could also be advanced scope of work and specification. Equipment requests should be prepared to provide price lists and an explanation, if it's an equipment system, for how the whole system works together as a system, rather than just sort of a shopping list that we need to piece together. So please be prepared to frame it in a way that helps the panel understand what the actual system is that's being proposed. Okay, and then I will just say again, for large cap, in order to be ready to apply, you should have consulted with Lindsay or myself about whether the application is appropriate. We'll want to make sure that the project that's being designed qualifies as capital. This is for design. So you'll want to make sure that you are working on drawings that are going to point to a project that would ultimately be considered a capital project. When we consider support for design, we are considering it capital support. So we are considering it as part and parcel with the project that you are proposing as the future construction project. So please make sure that you have enough detail to provide evidence that what you're proposing is in fact capital. Your conceptual design phase should be complete. If you have not yet done conceptual design and you need to for the kind of project that you're doing, you're not ready to apply for this program yet. You should have as detailed of an estimate as is possible at this phase for the overall project. Our expectation will be that you have consulted with the folks that you need to in order to give yourself a sense of what your fundraising goals are going to be, what the total project cost is going to be. And then you should already have a design consultant on board. So if it's an architect, if it's an engineer, whoever it is that's appropriate for the project you're conducting, you should already have signed a contract with them and be able to provide us with the details of that contract. And they should have completed your early stage design for you. Here are the funding priorities I mentioned before. I'm not going to read through the detail on all of them, but they are accessibility, artistry, cultural development, diversity, environmental sustainability, health and safety, organizational health, and structural and historical improvements. That's for small and mid-size. For large, its community development is or economic development is also a priority, and it's a required priority for the large program. So for design, your design documents themselves are not pointing to these priorities, but you're going to be asked to talk about how the overall project that you are designing or proposing here in the future is going to meet one or more of these priorities. And let me just say, you don't have to meet all of these priorities. You're asked to talk about how the project meets one or more. Talking about 2 or 3 is really sufficient. It's preferable that you don't try to hit every single one and make it a laundry list. Just try to focus and go deep on a couple of them where you can really talk in depth about how the project is aligning with each one. So let's talk for a moment about project financing and post-project operations. These grants operate mostly on a reimbursement basis, and we will put the payment schedule for awarded grants up on the screen a little bit later. Because they're mostly awarded on reimbursement, applicants must demonstrate that they have the capacity to manage the financing of the project through its completion. So you are asked to provide a fundraising, financing, and cash management plan. And through, if you're doing a matching request, it's not required for no match requests. But you are asked to provide this so that you can demonstrate to us that you're going to be able to float the project until you can receive those payments, which don't happen until you've reached 60% total project completion, and then again at 95% substantial completion of the project. So, one of the things that the panel will be looking for is that the organization has a solid financing plan in place and then has the capacity to fundraise. If it's a loan that you're looking for to do the financing, that you have the ability to fundraise and repay that loan once the project is complete. We're also looking for detailed plans for the maintenance and future operations of the facility after the project is complete. Some projects will have extensive maintenance requirements for highly technical equipment, for example, or there are certain finishes in the space that require ongoing maintenance. So in that case, you're going to be asked to talk about what that plan is and how you're going to cover the cost of it. In some cases, we are looking at projects where there are large extensions or additions being proposed or new construction of facilities, and it's going to require adding a lot of staff. And it's going to require a lot of marketing in order to fill the space. So please be prepared to talk about what those plans are in good detail in order to provide the panel with enough information about how you're going to continue to operate after this is complete. Design grant applications will have sort of a lower threshold for the level of detail that's anticipated, but you are still asked to talk about these items in as much detail as you can possibly provide at this point. And the other thing I just want to mention is, it is possible that sometimes NYSCA will award grants that are less than what the request amount was for. And, to get ahead of that, it's very helpful if you talk about what you will do if you get less than you ask for. So if you're applying for $1 million grant, in this section of your application, please talk about what will you do if you get $500,000 or $250,000. Do you have other means of fundraising to cover that gap? Will you have to reduce the scope of the project? How will you go about that? What areas would you have to cut, etc.? Okay, so you've all heard me talk for way too long. So I'm going to throw it over to Lindsay, who's going to walk us through a lot of other information. Lindsay, take it away.
Hi, everybody. I get to have the fun part of jumping in to talk about how the funds are dispersed. As Katie mentioned, the majority of this grant is on a reimbursement basis. The exception to that is grants made between $10,000 to $25,000 are paid in full upfront after your contract with NYSCA is executed and you've signed the letter of agreement. For any award of $50,000 or above, the first 25% is paid out once your NYSCA contract is executed. Again, just to reiterate, the contract period begins July 1st, 2025. So this would apply to any expenses incurred, not just paid, but incurred from July 1st onward. We do want to note that there are a number of documents and exactly what we request, again, depends on the size of your award, that will be required to execute contracts of $50,000 or more. If you'd like to visit the NYSCA website, and the link is there at the bottom of the screen, there is a page on Manage Your Capital Grant, and there are specific instructions about what has to happen once an award is made. We mention this because it can sometimes take anywhere from a couple of months to several months to execute a contract, depending on a number of things. A lot of it has to do with how many contractors or subcontractors you may have, again, the amount of the award, how complicated the budget may be, and also just how complete the documents are when they come to us to begin with. As your project progresses, when you reach 60% total project completion, and that is Again, 60% of the total project, not just 60% of the portion that NYSCA is funding. You can submit an interim report and you will be paid the next 35% of your grant. As your project winds up, you will submit a final report demonstrating 95% total project completion. This allows for punch list items, or perhaps your contract allows for withholding retainage. And then you will be paid the remainder of the grant, which is 40%, once that report has been approved and accepted. Some grantees, depending on the schedule of their project, may opt to submit just a final report showing 95% completion, and they skip the interim report process, and they're paid the remaining 75% of the project all at once. So that is certainly an option that is open to grantees should you choose to do it. We also just want to direct your attention to a page in the application, or pardon me, in the application guidelines titled "For all applicants who apply for funds under this program." Includes specific information on subcontracts, expenditures, payments, scope changes, to name a few. And again, this slide points to the exact page of each of the different guidelines that it's on. Finally, when it comes to design projects, there is an additional final report that is required for this program area. No payments are tied to it, but you will need to submit a final report that updates NYSCA on the completion of the overarching capital project that the design documents were created to support. Again, no grant payments are tied to it, but it will be required as time goes on, just to make sure you are available for future NYSCA funding. All right, so now we will talk about some of the other areas of the application that you need to be thinking about now and will come into more play should the grant be awarded. The first is the minority and women business enterprises requirement. So NYSCA projects comply with a 30% MWBE goal. This means that 30% of NYSCA funds need to go to a state certified minority or business enterprise or a women business enterprise. We do not specify that it needs to be 15% of one and 15% of the other. It is just a collective 30% goal. There is a link there, newyork.newyorkcontracts.com, that you can click on to search for state certified firms. We like to flag for people that just because a firm may be certified in your local municipality or in another state does not mean that they are necessarily certified with New York State. You are not required at the time that you submit your application to have identified your subcontractors, but we do want you to be mindful of this obligation and of this process, so that if you happen to engage any contractors in between the time of application, notification of award, or execution of your contract, that you have not backed yourself into a situation where you cannot meet the 30% MWBE utilization goal, and you did not document a good faith effort to do so in the process. A dedicated webinar exists on the MWBE goal requirement. The link is there. Again, you can get to it on the Manage Your Capital Grant page of the NYSCA website. Goes again into a lot of information that is more relevant to once an award is made, but understanding the process now is really important for making sure you document this as you go forward. One thing I will comment about is that design projects do have a slightly modified MWBE requirement. These projects are different because that we require that you do have your consultants identified at the time of your application. And so because of that, what it asks is for you to explain if there were any efforts to engage in MWBE and if they were successful. For design grants only, and I just want to reiterate, it is only in the design category, a waiver may be generated for pre-existing contractual relationships due to the nature of the program, that we do require for you to have had your architectural and engineering documents prepared to apply. However, any consultants that are engaged after a NYSCA award notification are going to be subject to the same 30% MWBE vendor utilization goal as the small, mid-size, and the larger capital opportunities. So for example, let's say you engaged an architect who helped you design your conceptual design, but then for whatever reason, you are no longer working with that architect after you learn that you've received an award from NYSCA. You'd then be required to adhere to all the same MWBE goals and documentation of good faith. So to talk about what happens when you can't comply with 30%, there is a process for considering a waiver, but grantees are required to make a good faith effort to engage an MWBE vendor and also document your efforts to do so. Reasons that a waiver might be considered is that no certified firms were available in your area or willing to travel to your area. No certified firms opt to bid. The bids are not competitive, or no certified firms have the appropriate expertise to conduct the work. However, just because these are reasons a waiver may be considered, it does not mean that it's a given. And again, it's very important that you as the grantee are documenting all of your efforts to engage MWBEs. And if at any point, even prior to receiving notification of an award from NYSCA, you feel that you are not going to be able to meet this requirement, please reach out to Capital Projects so that we can make sure you are documenting everything correctly. And if you do need to submit a waiver, that documentation already exists. Another aspect of this grant process, which you do not need to have figured out at the time of application, but we want you to be thinking about, is the vendor responsibility questionnaire. Again, you can refer back to that page on the NYSCA website about managing your capital project grant to learn more about this process. But all grantees with awards of $50,000 or more are going to be required to complete a vendor responsibility questionnaire. Again, you're not required to have identified your subcontractors at the time of the application, but please be mindful that any contractors you do engage are going to be required to complete the vendor responsibility questionnaire if they have a contract with you that is of $100,000 or more, and they are receiving NYSCA funds in any portion. So even if they're only funding, say, $10 of that whole, or NYSCA is only funding $10 of the whole $100,000 contract, they are still going to have to complete a vendor responsibility questionnaire. This requirement is to confirm that the contractors and subcontractors receiving state funds are responsible business entities. So please make sure that your contractors are aware of this requirement and they understand that your state funding is dependent on their cooperation in completing this. Occasionally we get questions about whether completion of this questionnaire constitutes a contract with a state. You can tell your contractors and subcontractors it does not. Again, this is just to confirm that any entity receiving state funds is performing responsibly. The Capital Project Fund application FAQs, which we will be posting relatively soon, include resources for conducting due diligence on your contractors, and that will be available on our website as well. So when it comes time to complete your application, again, this is going to be done in the Smart Simple system. There is a link in the guidelines that will take you straight there. You're going to be asked to select the categories for the size of your grant and then which funding type, whether it's match or no match. Those of you who have applied in the past probably recall that there was actually different questionnaires in the application for whether it was construction only, equipment only, or a hybrid of the two. So this year's application is more streamlined, and it will ask that question so that we know what panel to place it in for review, but the questions will all be the same. The application includes narrative responses, attachment uploads, and budgets. The required questions, budgets, and uploads are slightly different based on whether it is a match or no match grant, and then how much funding you're requesting. And then all application details, including the questions, the downloadable templates for the forms, these are all available now in the guidelines and also in the Smart Simple portal. Another page we'd like to direct your attention to in the guidelines that is too detailed to go through here on a single slide is just tips for completing your application. Again, there are specific page references here for the small, mid, large, and design. This answers a lot of questions about things like how to format your attachments. Also reminds folks that our panelists are reviewing dozens, if not 50 or 60 more applications. And so you want to be mindful of how much content you're putting in front of them. So please be complete, but also concise. As mentioned earlier, those who applied previously were used to seeing the applications change depending on whether you were applying for construction, equipment, or hybrid. As that's not the case this year, the areas that are most specific to changing the questions are, again, whether it's no match, mid-size, large, or design, and also the funding category you're applying in, because that will trigger some questions about prior year's 990s. We cannot reiterate enough. Please be sure to save your draft as you complete your application. You may find that when you go to click on a link to download a template or to upload some of your attachments, a message will pop up saying that you are about to leave the page. As long as you are saving your application as you go along and you save it before downloading any templates or uploading your attachments, those changes will be saved. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about uploads here. We just mentioned that it's important to save throughout before you do this. Label each document clearly and descriptively. We are often asked if there is a specific naming format people should use. There is not, but if you can be consistent, that certainly helps. It is helpful to upload documents in the order, if possible, and in the section they are requested. Again, this goes back to trying to make this process as seamless and straightforward for our panelists as possible. If they are looking for your budget in the budget section and they can't find it because you uploaded it in construction, that's not going to help your application any. So try to be as specific as possible where you upload your documents. We also ask you avoid any extremely large files or documents with too many pages unless it's appropriate and absolutely necessary. You can always reach out to us if you have questions about your uploads. And we do have an option to upload something that is not requested, but if that's the case, you really need to make it clear to us why this document is going to bring something to your application that has not been requested elsewhere in one of the narrative questions or one of the other uploads. An example here, would be, for example, if you've conducted a feasibility study or an existing conditions report. And I think there it would be most appropriate if you have just a few excerpts from it or an executive summary, something, again, that helps focus panelists' view to exactly what they need to be considering in light of your application. But pitch decks, a collection of press, those sorts of things are not usually going to be something that would be appropriate to upload in the application. All right, so we are going to talk about the budget briefly here. We will be posting a brief recorded webinar specifically on the budget. New for this year is that all applications of the same size all applications regardless of size are going to use the long form budget template. You may find that it is helpful to make Chrome your default browser when downloading any of these forms. We can go ahead on to the next slide. So the budget will have 3 tabs. The first has instructions. The second tab has got the itemized budget. And the third tab is the budget summary, and you will not need to worry about for the application. That's something that comes later. So all program areas, whether it's equipment, construction, or design, and regardless of how much funding you're requesting, are going to use the same budget form this year. Everyone will complete the fields next to the blue arrows. That's asking for the name of your organization and the name of your project. And everyone will have information to put in the columns under the orange areas. This is going to ask for the funding source, the status of whether it's in hand or projected, then the amount of funding you're asking NYSCA from, and then finally the total amount of your project. In the top area, so looking at the top green arrow, those are going to be the construction hard cost related expenses. So, let's say you are doing a bathroom upgrade. So you'd have a line there for plumbing, you'd have a line for general construction. If there's electrical work involved, you would have a line for electrical work. One thing to keep in mind for construction-related expenses is what we are looking for is the type of work. So who is going to be holding that contract for you? If you have a project that, let's say lumps several things together, say it's an overall weatherization project and you've got roof work and windows being replaced, but it's happening on, let's say, 2 different portions of the building. So we want you to talk about the project overall. You do not need to break it out in terms of the specific segmented portions. Then you'll see down below an area for capitally eligible systems. This would be where you would list, say, your lighting system or your theatrical audio system. And then down at the bottom is the area for listing design-related expenses, so your architect and engineer expenses. So if this is a construction project, you could have expenses in all 3 of those categories. But if it is a design application, you are only going to have expenses related to the design phase, so they will only be listed down in the bottom. Again, we will have a much more detailed webinar on this that actually goes through filling out the whole form. We can go on to the next slide. As you can see, the right-hand portion, so columns G through O, have been X'd out. That is because you do not need to worry about completing that at time of application. We use the same form throughout the life of a project. So those later columns will be completed in the reporting phase and the contracting phase, but you do not have to have them completed when you submit. We also just want to reiterate, we do understand that at the point you complete this application, a budget is just that. It's a budget. You may not have signed with any contractors. In fact, most people haven't. And so we understand that things may change. Also, executing the budget when you get to the contract stage is an iterative process. We may have identified something that isn't actually capitally eligible and need you to move it somewhere else. So just keep in mind that an approved project is not always an approved budget. But again, we work that out with grantees as part of the contracting phase. And now I'll hand it back to Katie.
Great, thank you, Lindsay. And as Lindsay mentioned, we will have a separate webinar just on completing the budget. So if you're looking at that with fear and hesitation and concern, we will actually walk you through how to fill it out. All right, so let's talk about how my application is evaluated. We've mentioned the panel a whole lot so far. Who is the panel? Every year we recruit multiple panels actually of experts to review all of the applications that we receive. Every panel has at least one of each of the different types of expertise that we require in order to evaluate all the different elements of a capital project. So this includes architects, engineers, a variety of technical professionals like production managers, lighting designers, sound designers, etc. We also have arts administrators and artistic leaders who have experience leading organizations through capital projects, construction managers, finance folks. It's really quite a variety, and they come together and everybody reviews ahead of time and then come together to discuss each project. And they bring an enormous amount of detail and rigor and expertise, and also an enormous amount of compassion to that process. So as Lindsay said, you want to be, thoughtful about what you're putting in front of them. They have a lot to review, but they review it all very seriously. So please keep that in mind. The panelists, as they are reviewing, will consider the design elements of the project, the value the project provides to the community, and the community's involvement in its, how it's determined and executed to a certain extent. They're also considering the overall project feasibility. And that includes everything from, can it be permitted, to what's your capacity to finance and to fundraise for the project, along with what's the feasibility that this organization can maintain this facility and operate in this facility after the project is complete. Next slide. Each panelist will review the application and give it a score. And that numerically rates each request against the criteria that are in our guidelines for each opportunity. The criteria are slightly different for the different opportunities, so please review them directly in the guideline PDFs. So other than for large cap, which has a fourth category, there are 3 categories. That is design and technical, and managerial, fiscal, and community relevance and access. So each panelist will give 1 score in each of those categories, and then those ratings are aggregated into 1 average score for each request. Those ratings ultimately inform the funding recommendations made by NYSCA staff. They're combined with the priorities that we discussed at the beginning of this application. The large cap, as I mentioned earlier, has an economic benefit cost analysis that is also incorporated into this scoring process, but that portion of it is not scored by the panelists. We are always looking for new panelists, so if you know somebody you think would be great, please either nominate them or send them the form to nominate themselves. Those nomination forms are available at arts.ny.gov/panelists. And on the next slide here, this is what the criteria look like for small and mid. It's tiny, so I encourage you to go into the PDF and review them at a normal font size. And again, those are the criteria headings, which I mentioned already. You can show the next slide. Design, similar criteria headings, but different benchmarks because of the nature of the project being somewhat different. And then on the following slide, we have a description of our scoring rubric. As I said earlier, it goes from 0 to 5. If you're scoring 5s in all your categories, it means that you're meeting or exceeding all of the different benchmarks in every column, which is great. 4 is meeting most of them. It's still a very good application. 3 is meeting some, but not all. 2 or below has some serious concerns about, either missing information or eligibility issues, or the project not sort of meeting the criteria in a variety of ways. Any application that scores has an average score from all of the panelists of a 2 or below in any individual criterion will not be able to receive funding. So you can have 5s in design and technical and 5s in managerial, but if you have a 2 or below in community, the application is ineligible for funding. And this table is also available in the guidelines that are on our website. If you have questions, there are lots of different people that you can contact. You can attend office hours, and the links to register for the office hour sessions, as I said, will be posted later today. The first one is this Thursday at noon. You can go to our website, arts.ny.gov, to the webinars section, and that's where they will be posted. You can reach out to us directly via email at capitalprojects@arts.ny.gov. That sounds like a faceless email address, but it's actually just Lindsay and me who review everything in it. So you really are just reaching out to us. Please email us there if you can. It helps us to keep track of all of the questions. And if you do have questions, we ask that you try to get them to us before January 8th. After that, it's difficult for us to guarantee that we can get you a response, especially if we have to confer with someone else to get it to you. And if you have really complicated questions, about lease agreements or things that might take some time, we really encourage you to get started and get those questions to us as soon as possible. If you have technical questions about submitting your application or about, anything related to the online portals, please email the help desk at help@arts.ny.gov. And if you have pre-qualification questions, you can email prequal@arts.ny.gov. Okay, so that is the standard presentation portion. We will move into a live question and answer session now. We have a number of questions that were submitted ahead of time. We know that some of you have been filling the Q&A with your questions as well. So we're going to get to as much as we can. We'll go till 12:30, and if we don't get to your question, it doesn't mean it wasn't a good one, and it doesn't mean we don't have an answer. So please reach out to us at office hours or at the Capital Projects email, and we will definitely get an answer back to you. All right. So
I'm going to hop in there real quick with
Go
one
for it.
last little PSA. The closer we get to the grant deadline, the more fast and furious the questions start piling up in capital projects. And Katie and I are both checking it, but we're also human. So if you have sent us a question and it's been like 2 or 3 days and you haven't heard from us, please don't hesitate to bump it back up. It just means we're getting totally flooded. So don't worry about nudging. We appreciate it.
There are some links in the chat that I just want to point to before we start the questions. The link to the guidelines is in the chat, and there's also a link to the office hours. So if you want to go and sign up a little bit later, that's where you'll find them. We have a great question to kick off, which is, you know, can organizations apply for large cap and design in the same year? And the answer is no. They cannot. You can only apply to one category. That's a great question. So you'll have to pick. And let's see. Okay, so let's just jump in. Are programmatic expenses such as film editing or literary programs, music festivals, exhibition installation, or art conservation eligible? No. So programmatic expenses are operating costs, and they cannot be funded with bonded dollars, which is what capital project funding is. So any programmatic expenses have to be left out of your capital budget. That's a different opportunity. And let me go down the list. Must the project be fully developed and ready for construction to be eligible for funding? So as close as possible. I think, you know, in terms of when we're reviewing for feasibility, and the panel's considering feasibility, projects that are closer to the shovel-ready start and the construction commencement are going to be considered more feasible just because they're further along. You can apply if it's a little bit further out, but we are going to give priority to those that are ready to start construction within 12 months. Lindsay, do you want me to keep going, or do you want to?
I'm taking a look at some of the others too, so if you want to keep going with those.
I'll keep going, and then you jump in when you're ready.
Yep.
Okay, does the program support building acquisition? Great question. The program does not support building acquisition as an expense that NYSCA can fund, but you can include the acquisition of the property in your matching costs and your total project cost if this is the initial renovation of the property that you have just acquired, and you can consider it to be one single total project, the purchase and improvement on that property. So if you are in the process of buying a building and you will close by the application deadline, you can absolutely include those acquisition costs as your match. Are historic preservation project applications eligible? That is a huge, it depends. Yes, some are eligible, but what you are actually, the work you are actually conducting has to qualify as a capital improvement. And so I'll give an example here. If you are, let's say, refurbishing the, historic brick wall, or brick facade, let's say, on the side of the building, and it's a complete refurbishment of the entire wall, then yes, that qualifies as a capital project. If you are cleaning the facade and it's purely aesthetic, then that does not qualify as a capital project, even though, we understand that from a historic preservation perspective, it's important and good to do. It qualifies as maintenance and not as capital improvement. If you have additional questions or you want to run your specific project by us, we're happy to review it. Are IT like computers or furniture eligible for funding? Those are two separate issues, so I'll address them separately. Computers are not eligible if they are, for office administrative use. A computer could be considered eligible if it is part of an overall capitally eligible system that's going to be used for some mission related or arts related purpose. So there are some um, building management systems or even lighting systems that operate through a computer. In that case, you could include the purchase of the computer as part of the overall system. Furniture is a separate issue. Furniture is a line called FF&E, furniture, fixtures, and equipment. FF&E is a line that is only eligible in a capital budget in two circumstances. One, if it's a brand new construction of a new building and it's the initial outfitting, or it's the initial outfitting after a change of use of a space. And the change of use of a space would have to be like not, well, this was a classroom and now it's a gallery. It would have to be something more like this was a factory and now it's a theater. Or this was a warehouse and now it's a cafe and, gallery space. So it's that kind of a change of use. If that's the case, then yes, you can include up to 2% of the total hard costs in the budget as FF&E. And FF&E is considered a soft cost. We didn't talk much about soft costs in the presentation, but soft costs are the other costs that are associated with the capital project that aren't the hard construction costs themselves. So design is one of them, and FF&E is another. You can include up to 15% of your grant request as soft costs. So if you're applying for $100,000, then $15,000 could go towards architectural drawings or engineering, etc. And since we're on that topic, let's see. I had another architectural question. Lindsay, do you have anything you want to jump in with?
Sure. So we are getting several people asking about applying in different program areas within a single year. You can only submit one NYSCA capital project per grant cycle. So you can apply in design, you can apply in small mid, or you can apply in large. And if you have any concerns about which one you should be applying in based on sort of where your project is at, feel free to reach out to us. There are also a couple of folks asking for clarification on funding limits if you've received prior NYSCA grant awards. So the way to determine how much you could request is you look at your cumulative funding from FY22 through FY24. Let's say that's $500,000. You want to apply in the small mid-range this year, you can request the maximum amount of what you have acquired so far and what is left. So like you'd have 2 million as the max for small mid, your cumulative amount of funds is 500,000. That means you can ask for $1.5 million. If you have received more than 2 million, but not more than 10 million, you can still request funds in the large cap category. Again, you would want to talk to us if you're applying in large cap to make sure that it meets, the economic and community development goals. But it's cumulative funding plus what you're about to ask for cannot exceed a particular program area's max amount. There's some also good questions in here about defining a project as part of a larger project. So if you are embarking on all new construction or an expansion or a full renovation, in order for that project to be deemed complete, the space has to be open to the public again. So if your space is going to remain functioning and you're just closed a couple of weeks while you come in and put in an all new HVAC, that HVAC can be your whole project. But if you're doing a new wing, the HVAC can be what NYSCA funds, but the entire project is going to be defined as the expenses for that new wing, because again, it has to be open to the public in order to be deemed complete for a major endeavor like a full refurbishment, renovation, new construction.
We're getting some questions about bid requirements. So we don't have a bidding requirement. Some projects will go out to bid and others will not, and that is okay. I will take it a step further, and someone asked, when do you need to submit bids for vendors during the grant cycle? You don't need to submit bids. You will need to provide contracts for any contractors that you have contracts with that are over $100,000 that NYSCA will provide any funding towards. So you need to be able to provide those by the time of your first interim report. You don't need to provide them by the time of the contract if you haven't signed contracts with your subcontractors yet. For our purposes, you are the contractor if you get a grant, and anybody that you sign a contract with is a subcontractor for us. So you don't need to have signed those by the time of the contract, but you do need to have them in place and be able to provide them by the time of your first report. And any of those organizations or firms, rather, will have to go through the vendor responsibility questionnaire process that Lindsay discussed during the panel, during the webinar.
And I saw there was a question about a template for the vendor responsibility questionnaire. So if you actually go to manage your capital grants on the NYSCA website, there is a link to the vendor responsibility website. It's actually separate from NYSCA entirely. And there you can get set up to create a profile, or your vendor can get set up to create a profile, and just start going ahead through that questionnaire.
Somebody asks here, are multiple sites possible? And it's hard to answer that without a little bit more detail about what you are proposing. I will say it has to be a single project. So if, let's say, you're buying the lot next door, or you were gifted the lot next door, and now you're going to expand into that lot with a new facility, and maybe they're going to be connected, yes, that could be considered. If you have multiple buildings on a campus and you're, let's say, going to do accessibility improvements throughout all of them, you could make that clear that that is a single campus-wide project for your organization. If you have, let's see, let's say you have one building and, you were doing a project on that, over the last year, and now you're going to do a different kind of project in a different building and it's across town, it's harder to make the case that that's a single project. If you want to run it by us, we will have a look and make a determination. I will say, if you are going to apply for projects that are on multiple pieces of property, please make sure that you're providing us with site control for all the different pieces of property that are going to be included in the project. So if it's multiple lots, you need to provide a deed for all of the lots. And we're happy to answer additional questions about that if you have them.
There's some questions about folks who may have funding under different program areas that NYSCA supports, like support for organizations. That funding is completely separate from capital. You don't need to consider it as part of prior NYSCA funding when making your request. Somewhere, somehow, an idea, because we get this question frequently, that that you couldn't apply for capital if you were also receiving support for orgs funding. That's not true. Again, totally separate. It's only you can't apply for multiple grants in the same year within the capital program, but if you have a support for orgs, that's fine. It does not affect your status in terms of being able to request capital funding.
Somebody asked us to just clarify about other state funding, or, other non-state but government funding. So you can absolutely have other state funding involved in the project, as long as the cumulative total of all state funding, including NYSCA, does not exceed 50% of the total project cost. And that is for matching grants. If you, other kinds of other kinds of government funding that are non-state are absolutely fine as the match. City funding is fine. Federal funding is fine. County funding is fine. And can be included as your other 50%. And then, of course, any kinds of private donations from individuals or foundations, also fine, corporate as well.
Someone is asking if they can reapply for the same project that they applied for last year that wasn't funded. And the question asks if there's a way to renew the application. You 100% can reapply for something that you applied for last year, unless you had a conversation with Katie and I in which we told you that the reason the project wasn't funded was because it wasn't eligible. If you did apply last year and weren't funded and have not had a conversation with either one of us about the panel's feedback, we suggest you do so ASAP before reapplying this year. You will need to submit a new application in the FY2025 application portal in Smart Simple, but you will find that many of the questions are the same. So a few changes here and there, but really we're asking a lot of the same things. So hopefully the process is not too cumbersome, but again, we really advise anyone who's reapplying in FY2025 who did not get funded in 24 to set up time to speak with us first.
Okay, I think we have to wrap it up. So thank you everybody so much for joining us. I know we've gone a little bit over, but it's a lot of information. So we just want to make sure that we provide as much of it as we can and clarify as much as we can. A reminder that this webinar has been recorded and will be posted on the NYSCA website along with the presentation deck, and that you can register for our upcoming Capital Office Hours, which will kick off this Thursday. To all of the attendees joining us today, we're so grateful for your remarkable work, your creativity and innovation, and we look forward to receiving your capital applications by January 14th, 2025, 4 p.m. at the latest, in pre-qualified status. So with that, we will conclude the regular presentation, stop the recording, and thank you all and have a wonderful day.